Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining OR's first webinar event. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items so you know how to participate in today's event. You have joined the presentation listening using your computer speaker system by default. If you prefer to join over the telephone, just select telephone in the audio pane and the dial-in information will be displayed. You have the opportunity to submit text questions to today's presenters by typing your questions into the questions pane of the control panel. You may send in your questions at any time during the presentation. We will collect these and address them during the Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. If we do not respond to all of the emails, all of the responses, we will email you afterwards. And now we will begin the recorded portion of today's webinar. To those who have just joined us, good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar on identifying critical skills to promote more positive outcomes in the transition to adulthood for young adults with ASD. My name is Tracy Cook and I am your host for today's event. I have the distinct pleasure of introducing today's speaker, OR's founding Scientific Council Chairman, Dr. Peter Gerhardt. Dr. Gerhardt is the Executive Director of the Epic School of Paramus, New Jersey. He has more than 35 years of experience utilizing the principles of ABA in support of the adolescents and adults with ASD in educational, employment, residential, and community-based settings. On those topics, he is the internationally renowned author and expert. In addition to serving as OR's Scientific Council co-chair, Dr. Gerhardt is on numerous professional advisory boards, including the Cambridge Center for Behavioral Studies. So, without further ado, I'll turn it over to you. Dr. Gerhardt, take it away.
Thank you very much, Tracy. I also want to, before we start, thank both Kimberly and Simone for all their help in getting this up and running. So I'm very happy to be here. I know it's Autism Awareness Month. Yesterday was World Autism Day. So I really think this is a very timely topic. So why don't we just get started? The fact is that if you're going to do transition planning and look for critical skills that the individual needs, you have to start with the belief that every student is capable of living and working in the community. And if those supports don't exist, then we have to create them. I really think that those of us who work in the environment of schools in particular have a pretty significant responsibility to make sure that we do this right. We are sort of the last best hope for this kid to be able to have the skills that he or she needs in order to have an included, positive adult quality of life. So in measurable terms, like what we really want to look at upon graduation, upon graduation, the students will exit school. They're employed a minimum of 20 hours. They have a social support network centered around where they live and work. They are able to make simple decisions and initiate actions on their own, and able to effectively manage their own behavior. Now, as the executive director of the Epic School, this is our informal mission. We have a more formal mission that's on our website, but this is our informal one. And it's overwhelming. And I will be very honest and say I'm not entirely sure how we're going to do this. But that doesn't stop me from having it as a mission. I think the best goals that we can develop are the ones that we're not quite sure that we're going to be able to reach. So that's why we have these here. But I will also, I've been doing this long enough that I could admit that there are challenges that exist that make this difficult sometimes. One is high rates of severe or unpredictable challenging behavior. And by high rates, I do mean high rates. Like if an individual displays aggression once a month, once a week, if it's once a week, you still have 4 other days when he's not aggressive to take him out. So the low rate is not an excuse at all. Poor hygiene and age-inappropriate clothing, that will actually disrupt your chances for social inclusion more than almost anything else. Poor eating skills, we do have a social barrier in North America, in this country, with eating appropriately. So if someone stuffs 14 French fries in their mouth while they're eating, or they steal French fries from somebody, or rub ketchup on their shirt, nobody wants to sit with them. It's very socially off-putting, so that's a big one. Inappropriate sexual behavior. This is a zero error area. Okay, we have a zero tolerance for this. It is one area that I cannot get accommodations for. I cannot go to a potential employer and say, well, he may scream every once in a while, but he's going to be working in the warehouse, so it's kind of loud, so it shouldn't be an issue. I can't say, well, he may masturbate once in a while, but he's going to be in the warehouse. That's a zero thing. There is no accommodation for that. And then not being bowel urine trained presents an overall challenge. And it's not so much a challenge to inclusion as a challenge to safety and a challenge to finding good staff in order to help this person in those very private behaviors while they're out in the community and at work. Oops. Went a little too fast there. This also means that no student has to earn the right to benefit from community-based instruction. I go to see other schools, and there are many good schools out there, and I think there are pockets of brilliance throughout the country. But I also sometimes see schools where they say that, like, he has to earn his tokens before he can go to Burger King. Let me be very blunt here. Like, there is, under no conditions does somebody have to earn tokens in order to benefit from instruction. So that just is a non-starter, let alone if the issue is that he has a behavior challenge at Burger King. I cannot teach him not to have a behavior challenge at Burger King if we don't go to Burger King. Now, I have to be smart about it. I have to think about what I'm doing, but I can't just say that, no, that actually means that this person cannot go out. Because quite honestly, more often than not, if we have aggression in school, and then we don't do any community-based instruction, then we have continued aggression in school, which results in more no community-based instruction, which results in continued aggression in school, and still no community-based instruction. It's been my experience and the experience of many of my colleagues that my individual learners, my students who have the most challenging behaviors, when we take them out into the community, we have a much greater chance of them not engaging in aggression and self-injury than we do if they stayed back in the school. Why? Because if we're doing our job right in the community, they're doing something that they want to do. They're doing something that's desirable, that's beneficial, that's fun, that they see a reason to do it. Even if it's going to work, work is set up to make sense. So it's a new activity. It's an activity that makes sense to them in that environment. So we tend to see lower rates of challenging behavior then, as opposed to sitting in a classroom where he or she has been sitting for the past 16 years of his or her life, doing basically the same things. Now, obviously they have different goals, but they're still being taught basically in the same way, often by the same people. After a while, that has to sort of wear on you, and I can understand why somebody might engage in aggression or self-injury under those conditions. So please don't let the challenging behavior be your guide to what the person can or cannot do in the community. Now, you have to be smart about it, but it really shouldn't be a limiter. Because if you have aggression in school, then you have specialized community-based instruction, then you have no aggression during CBI, and then you expand CBI, there's no aggression during CBI, and it sort of goes in a circle like this. I do want to note, obviously, that none of what I'm going to discuss is easy. In fact, if it were easy, I wouldn't have a job, and I assume neither would you. This is really complex stuff. We're talking about attempting to change a person's life for the better. That should be our standard. Like, every day I go home and I have to ask myself, did I change my student's life for the better? And most days I get to answer yes. Some days I have to say I don't know. Every once in a while I have to say I didn't. I sort of failed at my job. But that just gives me more reason to sort of rethink what I'm doing and how I'm doing it and keep moving forward. Part of this difficulty is that good transition planning requires expertise in a number of relevant disciplines. If you work with little kids, and I assume not many of you do who are here today listening, you get to be the specialist. You get to be the speech and language pathologist. You get to be the early intervention person. You get to be the BCBA. You get to be the OT. You get to be a specialist. As your students grow up, though, you have to become something that I call a specialized generalist. And yes, I am a behavior analyst. But I also understand individuals with the IDEA. I understand Department of Labor regulations. I understand Social Security and Social Security work incentives. I understand mental health and medication concerns, sexuality, menstrual care. I know more about menstrual care than any adult male should. Job development, job coaching, community-based instruction, generalized system of communication, staff training, and that's just a start. So if you think you're going to limit yourself to, I'm just going to look at this one tiny part as this individual gets older, you're going to become increasingly irrelevant to what this individual actually needs to move forward. So why all this stuff, though? Can't we just keep doing what we're doing? Well, we can't keep doing what we're doing because it doesn't really work. 2012, Paul Shattuck and colleagues did a comprehensive literature review looking at all the research that's supporting adults ages 18 and over that was published during the decade 2001 to 2011. And after reviewing all this evidence, they concluded that the field of adult services for adults with ASD is underdeveloped and can be considered a field of inquiry that is relatively uninformed. That's a problem. That's what I meant before about if we don't succeed while we're in school, it's incredibly difficult for the adult system to do this. Now, the adult system is populated by really good staff who want to do really good work, but are working in very adverse conditions as compared to what typical school personnel work in. So again, it's going to fall to us to make sure that we are doing this correctly. A study that came out in 2015 by Roux, Paul Shattuck is also part of this. They looked at the NLTS2 data. The National Longitudinal Transition Survey was a massive, federally funded, nationwide survey of outcomes with students with disability labels. So it was, people with learning disabilities, people with autism, people with intellectual disabilities, and they looked at them post-graduation, how they were doing. And basically what the data supported was that young adults with autism have a difficult time following high school for almost any outcome you choose. Working, continuing school, living independently, socializing and participating in the community, and staying healthy and safe. To complicate matters, many of these youth begin the journey into adulthood by stepping off a services cliff. Access to needed supports and services drops off dramatically after high school, with too many having no help at all. That's what happens if we just keep doing same old, same old. If we just keep doing what we've been doing, these are the results we're getting. So that's why I'm advocating that we need to look at this more than a little bit differently. I'm not going to talk about that. But 2017, out of the Autism Spectrum Disorder program at Drexel University, they looked at a large survey of adults, 3,520 adults with ASD. The notable findings found that paid community employment was the least common outcome, and that only 14% had a job. Those are not outcomes that any of us should be happy with. Almost half still lived at home. 1/4 had no work or day activities programs. Once again, these are not outcomes that we work for. These are not the outcomes that all of us have sort of dedicated our lives to. So we need to actually dedicate ourselves to changing these outcomes. But you know what? What are good outcomes? What do we mean by a good outcome anyway? Now, the fact is that what I think is a good outcome may not be what the person wants out of life. I often talk about that when I graduated college in 1981, I had a blonde mohawk. I was playing drums. My biggest concern was, do I have enough money to buy beer? I thought my outcome at that point was really great. I thought it was the best possible outcome I could have ever had. My parents, on the other hand, thought they wasted their money sending me to college if this was going to be what I was going to do. So what is a good outcome is a very idiosyncratic decision. So I consider my job to be making sure that each individual I work with has as many opportunities as possible in their life so that they can actually make the choices that are going to lead to their own definition of what is a positive quality of life. Of those three, all those opportunities, I said the first for me comes down to we need to teach individuals to have choice in their life. We need to make sure that you have the opportunity to access your choices and that you have the ability to exercise personal control over important things. Okay? All of this, in turn, should lead us to that mythical thing called happiness. Now, we don't often talk about happiness in our field, but ask any parent of any kid, what do they want when their son or daughter grows up? 9 times out of 10, they say, I want them to be happy. Okay? Parents of kids on the spectrum basically want their kid to be happy, but they want them to be productive. They want them to be included. They want them to have lives. I would bet very few of you listening today have ever written an IEP goal with happiness as an outcome variable. But the fact is, we can do this. As a matter of fact, happiness among people with profound and multiple disabilities can be defined, reliably observed, and systematically increased, supporting the fact that the contributions to behavior analysis for enhancing the quality of life among people with profound and multiple disabilities may be increased significantly. Happiness. Like, what a novel concept, right? And happiness doesn't mean that he sits in the corner and eats Cheetos and watches Barney and like that's not happiness if that's all you can do. Happiness means that you have a bunch of choices in your life and you get to choose what it is that is most important to you at any given point. So while we all need measurable outcomes in transition, like individual quality of life, which is a critical skill, is more defined by having choice, opportunity, control, and the chance to be happy. Well, the problem is the one resource we'll never have enough of in school systems is time. Okay, we may have educated, trained, qualified special education teachers. We may have educated, trained, qualified BCBAs, OT, speech and language professionals, like all kinds of support personnel, but time is not on our side. For example, in New Jersey, we have 210 school days, which includes the summer session. If I have a 6-hour program, and then we figure out how many hours they're actually fully engaged in that 6 hours, take out lunch, take out breaks, so let's say it's 5 hours. So that means over the total hours a year engaged, it's 1,050 hours. Multiply that by 5, from 17 to 21, we're now at 5,250. If the average number of goals in an IEP is 30, that gives us 150 goals across 5 years. That means that we have only 35 hours to teach each goal. And if we're doing our job right, we're talking about some complicated goals. We're talking about going to work. We're talking about going out into the community. We're talking about navigating the entire school building. We're not talking about simple, discrete trial type goals. We're talking about much more complex chaining, shaping, task analyzed goals that are going to require a significant amount of time. So 35 hours a goal, not really a heck of a lot. So what do we do? Well, see, here's the universe of skills at 5, which are those that we usually teach. Now, I'm not knocking competent 5-year-olds. Like, typical 5-year-olds are actually pretty amazing. I'm always impressed by what little 5-year-olds can do. They kind of scare the hell out of me, but I'm not a big typical kid person. But the fact is they are pretty amazing, but it's still a relatively small skill set. This is the universe of skills at adulthood. But the skill set that all of you listening today have is amazing. And what's astounding is that all of the skills that you can't do outnumber the skills you can do. There are millions of things you can't do, hundreds of things you can do, but we focus on what you can do. Unless you have a disability, then we focus on what you can't do. Nobody ever says, Peter Gerhardt, well, he's a good guy, but you know what? He can't sew. They say, Peter Gerhardt, he's a good guy. I mean, I hope they say Peter Gerhardt is a good guy, and he can do X. So the first thing we need to do is start looking at what can a person do, what do they want to do, where their strengths lie, and build upon those strengths. Because honestly, I'm really, really tired of talking about deficits. I get the deficits. I understand what people can't do. So how do we remediate those deficits in a way that actually supports this person to acquire those skills he or she is going to need in adulthood? So how do we determine what those skills might be? Well, the first thing you need to do is conduct an inventory of your available resources. So do you have the staff and related personnel resources, including staff training? What about parent support? Do you have support from the administration, which is a big consideration in doing much of this? And we'll talk about it a little later. Ability to access the community for community-based instruction. I worked in New York City for a couple of years at a school for kids with classic autism, low verbal kids. And New York City is the greatest place in the world to work because I could just step outside the school and I had access to all the community-based instruction locations that I needed or wanted. I didn't need a van. I didn't need to get permission slips. I could just step out the door. So the resources in that environment are significant. But do we have the money resources? What about individual specific resources that resource restrictions that may come into play? Community support and locations for community-based instruction. And then resources related to identifying job training sites and all of the permutations that come with that. Before I go any further, I want to wrap this up with a brief discussion of community-based instruction. When I say community-based instruction, what I'm talking about is direct intensive instruction in the community. Once somebody graduates at the age of 18 or 21, they are never again in a classroom. So we need to move away from this notion that we're teaching him life skills if we're teaching him life skills in the classroom. Because by and large, we're not. So according to the National Secondary Transition Technical Assistance Center, community-based instruction is considered a evidence-based practice, and it's a hands-on process requiring involvement of local businesses, potential coworkers, families, and community members. Community-based instruction is not and should not be understood or implemented as field trips. Okay, at the EPIC school, we do not do field trips. Every opportunity for an educational experience has to be taken account of. So just doing something because we think it might be fun isn't what we do. Families can do that. Other resources can do that. That is not our goal. So we rely on other groups to take care of that aspect while we focus on how do we give you the skills necessary for adult life. CBI is used to develop skills in at least the following areas: employment, okay, community, leisure, and communication. Now, communication is applicable across all domains here, but each one of these really has to be specific to the person in question. So there are some generalizable skills. There are some, and I'll talk about those later on. But what happens is we often focus on skills that are very specific and not generalizable. So they don't really add much to the transition process. CBI is designed to improve independent communication across a variety of community settings. It's intended to provide a repertoire of socially valid skills such as purchasing and accessing entertainment. When I was working in New York City, we did a social validity study where we had kids, again, classic autism, low verbal kids. They would go shopping at the local grocery store, which is just about a block from where the school was. And we did a study where we started to ask community members what they thought was the most important skill for our students to learn. Now, we're behavior analysts and special educators and speech and language professionals, and everybody's thinking, well, like he has to stand quietly in line, he has to wait his turn appropriately, and those were important. People rated those important, but what they rated as the most important skill was paying quickly when you're with your debit card when it was time to pay. Because if my students paid slowly, they were now holding up the entire line behind them. So one of the things we realized is that New Yorkers understand autism. They really didn't care if this kid talked to himself or if he rocked or if he did, engaged in other things that seemed a little different. This is New York. Like, it's a broad definition of little different. But if you delay them from what they want to be doing, then that's a problem. So we had to change our whole task analysis around to say, okay, as soon as you put all your stuff on the conveyor belt, then you take out your debit card. So you are ready the second that the cashier says it's so-and-so, so you can pay. It's how we can provide a repertoire of leisure skills, how we can look at context-based social skills, and I think critically important is to build a repertoire of basic safety skills. We often don't think really in terms of safety skills because we make an assumption that someone is going to be with the person all the time. A, that's a faulty assumption, and B, even that doesn't define safety. So taking a closer look at safety skills, I think, is incredibly important. The difference between classroom-based instruction and community-based instruction. I assume most, if not all of you, know what chaining is. Chaining is when you have a long task and you break it down to its components parts, and you chain step 1 to step 2, then step 1 and 2 to step 3, and then step 1, 2, and 3 to step 4. So you're chaining the individual sequence of steps in the task to complete this longer task. Much of what we do as adults are very complex series of chained behaviors. Taking a shower is a complex series of chained behaviors. Very little of what I do is a very discrete, one-off sort of thing. So we all know chaining. Now, on your screen is a task analysis for zipping a jacket. This would be a chaining task analysis. You start with step 1, then you want to chain step 1 to step 2, and then step 1 and 2 to 3, and so on. With this task analysis, once you have mastered this, once your student knows how to zipper a zipper on a jacket, they can zipper every zipper on the planet. It doesn't change. There is no variability. You don't go to Australia and you zipper, the zipper starts at the top and you have to zipper down. It's like there's no, like a zipper is a zipper is a zipper. It's consistent. That's how classrooms work. In the community, however, we have to account for a lot of variability. So if this is the beginning of the task analysis for grocery shopping, we have it broken down into 3 component steps, which are production skills, social skills, and navigation skills. Production skills are those actual motor skills that allow the individual to complete the task. Social skills are, as you would expect, all those social behaviors that we need to navigate the environment. And then navigation skills are those skills that allow the person to actually physically navigate the environment safely and return to where they started. So if we start with entering the store, it's a navigation skill. The variability is low. The door is in the same place every time. Don't have to worry about that. Locate the shopping basket. Okay, variability is still pretty low. Occasionally there's no basket, so you have to go look for one, but still pretty, it's still pretty low. But now going into the grocery store and avoid walking into other shoppers. Well, some days there's nobody there. Some days there's a lot of people there. Some days there's a lot of people there who just stop their carts in the middle of the aisle. So now we're starting to get any number of variations in how the skill is supposed to be displayed. Engage in various social courtesies throughout this task analysis. Highly valuable. Check your shopping list, a production skill. Low variability. Then move to the first aisle, navigation skill. Has some variability because, again, we don't know how crowded this is. Identify the item on the shelf. Stop at item, and so on and so forth. But that's the difference between classroom-based and community-based, is the amount of variability in how the task analysis is going to be expressed. And unless you get sufficient practice in doing this, you never become even close to independent, and you just rely on somebody else to help you with this, whether it's through prompting or a picture schedule or whatever. So this is why community-based instruction is so important, because it allows us to teach those skills that really focus on what's going to matter once you're out of the classroom. If you're going to develop community-based instructional goals, first of all, really just think big. You can look at production, social navigation, and safety skills. That's fine. When you're going to develop your task analysis, what I strongly recommend you do is before you rate anything, go out into the community with your student and just sort of walk through the expected task with him or her. For example, one of my favorite things to do before teaching grocery shopping is to go to the grocery store with the student, enter the grocery store, and then just sort of say, okay, go. And let the student go find what they want. Now, oftentimes there's a little bit of resistance on the part of the student because they've been taught that they can't do that. So encouraging them to sort of strike out on their own is sometimes a bit of a challenge, but once they do, they're fine. Every student I've ever worked with can consistently find either the snack aisle or the candy aisle. Now, what that tells me is that that's the most important part of this supermarket to this student. So if I'm going to be smart, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start my task analysis with student enters the store, picks up the handbasket, goes to the snack aisle or candy aisle, picks one thing that they want, goes to the checkout counter, pays for their item, and I don't care if he eats it as soon as he pays for it. Because I want the reinforcement to come as close to the actual behavior as possible. But we often don't do things like that, do we? Typically, we have a pre-printed grocery shopping program, and on it is a list of 10 things that we have to have this child buy, this student buy, and they're probably nothing that this individual really cares about. And if they do happen to pick up something that they want and put in the cart, we have them put it back. Under what conditions is this person going to want to go grocery shopping? Under what circumstances is this actually going to become part of their behavioral repertoire? And the answer basically is none, because there's no reason for them to do it for themselves. They're doing it for somebody else. Getting back to my example with the student who, they first go in, then they go to the candy aisle, they buy something, yada, yada. Well, then the second step is, okay, before you go to the candy aisle or the snack aisle, go get a gallon of milk. So we backwards chain the shopping list. So we can build up to a list of 10 or whatever, but then it always ends on you getting your favorite thing, and I don't care if you eat it as soon as you pay for it. That's sort of a standard rule, okay? I want to talk about that. I think what's really important is how often do you provide CBI? One of the challenges is that it becomes sort of a weekly thing. We're going to do CBI for on Fridays. And since we're looking at complex and usually variable behavior chains, that's rarely enough for individuals to actually acquire the skills. So this is what I want you to do if you're thinking about how often do I have to do CBI. So you know your students well, I assume, and you know their learning history well, I assume. So you can look at your student and say, for this task, for this complex behavior chain, they probably will need 100 learning opportunities or CBI opportunities to acquire the skill. That's going every week for 2 years, okay? But then we want this client to learn it in 6 months. Well, that now means that we have to say, okay, he needs 100 repetitions of this across 220 days. Okay, that's for 1 year, so that means we have to do at least one every other day. But if we want him to do this in half a year, we have to go every year, every day. Because if we don't, he or she never acquires this skill. And this is how we all learn. We all learn through repeated practice. This is not an autism thing. This is not even necessarily an ABA thing. This is how we all learn and acquire new skills through repeated practice. Okay? The example I first gave about if he goes once a week to learn how to grocery shop, A, he's not getting enough practice to acquire the skill, and B, our inter-trial interval, that gap between the 2 times that he goes, is way too long for him to actually maintain any of the skills that he did learn. So we just sort of keep doing the same thing over and over again and expecting individuals to acquire skills that we're not providing them with sufficient opportunities to learn. We want to look at community support out there. And the fact of the matter is that as skill competence grows, level of community support goes down. Some of my colleagues really prefer to teach their students to use the self-checkout. Personally, I hate the self-checkout. I teach students to actually go to the regular checkout. But I also try and target cashiers that are actually friendly and nice, because I want them to engage with my students. I want them to become part of this practice. And if my student makes a mistake, I want them to be the ones to help out and not me. So I may actually provide some training to the cashiers to say, by the way, we're coming in with some students. Their names are John and Bill. Like, I don't talk about autism, but I say we're a special needs school. By the way, when it's time to tell him how much to pay, talk to him. Don't talk to me. Like, if you have a question for him, ask him, don't ask me. Because otherwise they tend to ask the adult in the room, and that doesn't help me. So I can actually make somebody more independent just by training people in the community to help support them so that I don't have to be there. Interdependence is and ought to be as much an ideal of man as self-sufficiency. We often talk about independence, which is great. We all want to be as independent as possible, but the fact is most of us most of the time are interdependent. The example that I actually like to use is that I was at the Nevada ABA conference, and at one point I got up from the conference site, and I went to go use the bathroom, and I walked out of the room, and there was a sign that said men's room this way with an arrow. And I went down the hallway, and then I got to a corner, and there was another sign that said men's room this way with an arrow. And I followed that arrow, and then I found the men's room. Now, nobody would say that I'm dependent on 2 written prompts to find the men's room. They would say that I used the prompts in the community to actually independently find this. That's interdependence. I know how to find the supports I need so that I can be as independent as possible. We only have about 15 minutes left, so I am going to jump ahead on some of this stuff, but you do have the handouts, okay? So please, feel free to, if you have any questions, you can always email me. I tend to put too much in this, I guess. But let me go to these sort of summary points here. The success or failure of transitioning rests on your shoulders. You accepted the job and no one else is going to do it for you. We can't blame it on parents not doing their part. We can't blame it on the student. We can't blame it. We're the ones who are supposed to be doing this. And again, I'm going to come back. This is incredibly difficult. And it can't be done by sitting in our classrooms all the time. This is true no matter where you are on the spectrum. I think we do a disservice to our students who are fully included on grade level and are slated to graduate with their class and possibly go to college when we don't also teach them how to work as part of a team, how to navigate their environment, how to drive a car, how to shop for themselves, how to cook for themselves, how to go to a doctor's appointment, how to schedule a doctor's appointment. All of those things that you need to know are actually, quite honestly, far more important than knowing how to factor a binomial equation. Start early when you do this, and certainly no later than age 16. We start at age 12 talking about where we're going with this. So starting at age 12, we have 5-year plans developed where we look down the road. We meet with families. We meet with siblings. We meet with friends. We meet with a bunch of people involved with this young individual and say, where do you see them in 5 years? And now how do we get there? So that we can plan each IEP based upon where we're going as opposed to where we've been. Remember that in transition planning, the first transition plan is usually a draft and rarely final. So change them. Back in 1980, when I started in the field, behavioral maxim number 1 was we know that individuals with autism spectrum disorders, at the time it was just autism, we didn't have a spectrum at the time, individuals with autism don't generalize well. So teach where the behavior is most likely to be displayed. Teaching to purchase at the fake store doesn't work. Okay? Teaching to do a lot of stuff out of context doesn't really help because the actual context is so different that the skills that we taught tend not to generalize. So it is more effective to teach grocery shopping at the actual supermarket than it is to teach it in the classroom. The more you do this, the more you'll be able to think outside the box in your problem solving. Now, what I mean, think outside the box, it really is like, okay, what is the best, fastest, easiest way for me to accomplish this goal? And what is the actual goal? For example, I go back to grocery shopping now, where most of the time in my past, I would say, well, the grocery shopping goal is that he has to get 10 out of 10 items on his shopping list and independently navigate the grocery store with a staff 10 feet behind him, and that's about as far as I would go. Now, the goal I want to look at is, can I stay outside the grocery store and the individual independently goes in, gets the basket, shops with his grocery list, and it can be on his iPhone, it can be verbal, it can be any number of ways we can do this, shops for his grocery list of 10 items, gets at least 6 out of 10 items, maybe adds one different item that he or she likes, and then pays for everything and independently comes out. Because doing all that independently and then paying and exiting the store are the real goals, not getting 10 out of 10 things on my grocery list. Because there isn't a person on this conference call, on this webinar, that hasn't gone to the grocery store and come home and forgotten to get the one thing that they actually went for. So we need to sort of think in those terms. I have 5 minutes left. The true goal of transition planning is a positive quality of life. Think of those skills that are going to be most important to you. In many ways, the things you do every day are more important than the things you do once in a while. When I start with these 5-year plans, a question I often ask parents is, does your son or daughter get up with an alarm clock? They usually say no, and I say, well, do you get up with an alarm clock? And they say yes, and I say, well, how does your son get up? And they say, well, I get him up. And I'm like, yeah, but he probably should get up by an alarm clock. And they say, well, he hates loud noises. And I say, well, that's the definition of an alarm clock. But you know what getting up to an alarm clock really is? It's a safety skill. If I can teach this kid to get up in the morning to an alarm clock, no paid staff ever has to be in the bedroom with him in the morning. And that's a really important part of life. And he does it every day. So that's a big thing. Risk is part of life and part of CBI. Your best bet is to identify sources of risk and work to minimize them. We've become so risk averse. We are so afraid that something will happen. Ask yourself, what's the worst possible scenario here? Okay, he's at the grocery store, he might drop the eggs. So he'll open the bag of Doritos and start eating Doritos before he pays for them. Like 1 out of 10 customers at the grocery store does that. Like, as long as he pays for them, like, why do I care? Like, we need to focus on the right skills in the right way at the right time in order for people to be as independent as possible. Even if your available resources are slim, there are still any number of things you can do to support as effective a transition as possible. Now, we do have a policy on instructional risk that I can actually send to OR and they can actually distribute it, because we ask parents to sign off on this, to understand that we're going to be actually not just 10 feet away, but maybe we're going to be down the end of the aisle. That's the end of the talk today. That was a really, really quick overview of transition planning. But what I want to emphasize with you before we go to the questions is the importance of thinking ahead. Okay, you need to have this vision of what your student can do with the proper supports, not what they can't do. Think of what they can do. And think big. If you think big and you miss, you still end up in a better place than if you thought small and succeeded. And I will tell you, based upon my experience, my 38 years of experience at this point, everybody continues to acquire new skills throughout their lifetime. There is nobody who is too challenged to learn as an adult And the fact is, I can actually help you have the life that you want as an adult. But it's not easy. And it requires a lot of effort on our part. I steal the line from the Army, which this is the toughest job you will ever love. Okay? None of this is easy. All of this is hard. But you're actually working to give this individual an adult life of quality, dignity, and happiness. And personally, I think that's a pretty cool job to have. So I just want to thank you all for hanging out for those last 45 minutes. And I think we have some time for questions now.
Thank you, Dr. Gerhardt. We're now going to begin answering the questions submitted during today's presentation. As a reminder, you can still submit questions through the questions pane in your control panel. Dr. Gerhardt, our first question is from Darnia, and she asked, what is the role of the speech and language pathologist working with this population to ensure they integrate successfully into the community?
That's a great question. I am a behavior analyst, but I work very well with speech and language pathologists. They have a different knowledge set than I do. Like, I've read Skinner's Verbal Behavior 3 times, but Skinner never mentioned iPads or proloquo or apraxia. Like, all of that stuff where I need some very specialized knowledge about. My favorite thing to do with the speech paths that I work with is have them go out in the community with us and have them identify where the real significant communication gaps are outside the context of the classroom, and help me then develop effective strategies that are going to alleviate this deficit. Because, and again, this is anecdotal, I don't have the data to support that, if I can give you the communication skills, the base communication skills necessary to actually succeed in this particular environment, then the rest of the world is far more forgiving. So if you do drop the eggs, but you can say, I'm sorry, you can get away with it. If you drop the eggs and just leave them there, you're not going to get away with it. That's kind of a problem. So going out with my speech pathologist to actually have them work with me to understand like what really should be the primary targets here. The second part of that is I've learned through working on my speech paths, and yes, we have a speaker behavior and listener behavior, but all communication is two-way. So when I mentioned training the person at the cashier, why wouldn't we want to do that? We all went to school to learn how to do this. This person doesn't know how to do this, but we expect them to be able to interact with this person, especially since they've been sort of shaped to not do that. So what's the best way for me to support this person, this typical person in the community in this communicative interaction? So there's any of number of roles for the speech and language pathologist in this process, both in school, but more importantly, I think out of school, to help us look at what are those skills that the person really needs.
Thank you, Dr. Gerhardt. Our next question is coming from Lauren. Lauren asks, suggestions for students who need medical supports, for example, nursing but don't require 24-hour care.
This is when you really have to just get creative. Now there are, if you're looking at job development, looking at job carving, and how to figure out what is going to be the best possible job for them so that their physical health is not negatively impacted. Is there even a possibility that he or she could work at a hospital? So they're actually closer to any medical services that he or she might need. It really is going to depend on the person. The biggest medical challenge I think that we deal with are individuals that have some significant allergies. And while I can have a peanut-free school, I can't have a peanut-free world. So looking for places that are more health conscious, that are a little more aware of individual differences and willing to accept that, really can make all the difference in the world that this is going to be an important thing if we want this person to be part of our social circle, our job, our leisure circle. Um, I think this again is another example where, to some extent, training the typicals is going to be really important, particularly if the individual can't self-disclose on some level. So now we may need to get parental permission. We may need to get, to talk a little bit about it. But I'm a big fan of actually talking about these issues because it demystifies them. Ignoring them just leaves the typical community to sort of make up their own backstory as to what's going on there. And not only are they wrong, they're probably wrong in the worst possible way. So between job carving, being a little creative, training some of the people around them, we're able to accommodate almost anybody.
Thank you, Dr. Gerhardt. Our next question comes from Maya. Maya asks, how can families go about teaching skills during the transition to adulthood when repetitive interest and anxiety interfere to the degree that instruction is difficult and or impossible?
One of the things that we do know is that particularly with the onset of adolescence and puberty, that we do among individuals with ASD labels see an increase in secondary psychiatric disorders. Some data report it to be 2 to 4 times higher that of their typical peers. It does appear that anxiety disorders are the most prevalent secondary psychiatric condition, but depression occurs. There's bipolar disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, and they are all incredibly challenging impediments to doing this well. Having said that, they're just another impediment. Now, ideally, when talking about families, one of the things that we're working on now is starting a lot of instruction that might typically wait for later early on. For example, we are working with parents of some of our very young kids, 6-year-olds, 7-year-olds, to shower independently. We recommend that that's what they should start teaching them to shower independently. Now, I understand that typical 5-year-olds or 7-year-olds don't shower. But I also understand that waiting until they're 15 makes it incredibly difficult to do that because, A, they haven't showered now for 15 years. They have an established behavior, which is sitting in the tub while mom washes them 9 times out of 10. So why would they want to change that and adopt this more difficult behavior? The other good reason to do it early is every family does what every family does to get it. And families all fall into either good habits or bad habits about how they do things. And changing habits is really difficult for all of us. So this is not a family of ASD thing. This is just a person thing. And we get a certain way of doing things. So the earlier we can start looking at teaching some of these important skills, the better off we're going to be. Getting back to the specific topic, though, first of all, we do know that these secondary psychiatric disorders are not only underdiagnosed, they're also then poorly treated. The wrong medication may be given for the wrong amount of time. It may be changed. The medication may be added. Data aren't really collected. That leads to sort of this persistence of all of these challenges and this sort of almost learned helplessness. Well, nothing helps, so we're just going to give up. I'm a behavior analyst, so I do know that there are multiple behavioral avenues into looking at how to best support a person, particularly if they have an anxiety disorder. Working on behavioral relaxation training can be an incredibly effective intervention if it's done right. It's difficult to do. The last thing I just want to say on it is we also, when we're looking at families, we don't ask them to change everything overnight. We ask them to change one thing. And we ask them to change the easiest thing that they are likely to have the most immediate success with. Why? Because I want them to be reinforced for their effort so that they change this behavior and everything went well. I don't get to the tough stuff till much later down the road. If I'm coming in and I'm saying, I want you to change everything about your house in order to it's not going to happen. So I have to use the same smarts that I use for changing behavior with my students to change the behavior of my parents that I work with. And I tell my staff all the time, shaping works with everybody. Okay? And it's moving in one positive direction so that we're not like overnight changing behavior, but we're changing it little by little in a positive way that reinforces them.
Thank you, Dr. Gerhardt. Our next question comes from Joan. Joan asks, if your school is very small with limited resources, what are the priorities in terms of CBI? Thank you.
My school is very small. I have 32 students. So I understand that, and that means that if one staff is out, it can be a significant challenge. But we actually have prioritized CBI as that is the default option. So if individuals are scheduled to go to CBI, we try to arrange schedules to best support, and we do actually, it's not try, we do arrange schedules to best support the individuals who still stay in school while making sure the individual has their community-based instruction experience. The biggest fiscal challenge, I think, to doing this is vehicles. And I think that that's probably one of the biggest limiters that we have out there is, so student X goes out on community-based instruction and they take the van, then nobody else can go out at that point, especially if the school is located in a more rural or suburban area. So now they have to wait for it to come back. And then they have to do, like, vehicles are one of those things that are always going to be a challenge. But the only way I can teach out in the community from where we are, there's nothing I can walk to. So I have to drive to places where I want to do the instruction that I need to do. So I need vehicles. That doesn't solve your problem, quite honestly. But one of the things that you can do is actually work with the family to say, listen, we want to do community-based instruction. Why don't you come pick them up and we'll go with you, and then we can do community-based instruction, and we can actually teach you how to do this at the same time. So we're working with the family actually to provide this level of instruction, so we're not having this sort of ripple domino effect on the rest of the program. It is not easy. I'm not always successful, but it takes a lot of creativity and a lot of really dedicated staff to make it work.
Thank you, Dr. Gerhardt. We have time for just one more question. Jean asks, how do families find a good behavioral analyst to help? And is there a directory?
There is a directory. You can go to the Behavior Analysis Certification Board and see there, or you can go to, most states have a chapter of Association for Behavior Analysis International, whether it's New Jersey ABA or Penn ABA, or so you can go there. The challenge, in my experience, is finding a behavior analyst who is willing and interested in working outside of a very controlled environment. We have been sort of brought up in a field where we want to control all the variables, and I get that. I still understand that, and I still like that. And it's easy to control all the variables in a classroom because I control them all. I say when we start, when we stop, what we work on, who works for you, how long you work with them, what the schedule of reinforcement is there music in the background, are the lights on, what's the bathroom, like I can control everything. But I step outside the classroom, and that's where the true test of what I do comes in. And I do think you need to find a behavior analyst who understands that the true measure of what they are doing is not what they do in a structured environment, but how that manifests itself in an unstructured environment. How they would then transition what's going on in this very structured environment into an unstructured environment. Because that's got to be our success. And for behavior analysts, that's actually the seventh dimension of behavior analysis. Interventions designed to actually continue with behavior change after the intervention has been terminated. They're hard to find. Most behavior analysts get into the field to work with little kids. Little kids are cute. Little cute kids are fun. But this is where I think we can have the greatest impact because we can do so much in behavior analysis, from safety skills to teaching life skills to teaching independence to, like, you name it, we can do this. But we have to be willing to sort of get outside our little cocoons and step into the real world. So those are the questions I would ask whoever you would be interested in hiring.
Excellent. And thank you, Dr. Gerhart. I see that we're at the top of the hour, so I would like to thank you and to thank everyone for participating in today's webinar. If you have submitted a question that we didn't get around to answering, we will be sure to follow up with you separately via email. Once you leave today's webinar, you will receive an exit survey. We would appreciate if you would complete that and provide your feedback. You may also submit any additional questions you may have through that form. You will also receive a follow-up email with a link to view an archived recording of today's webinar and handouts. And on behalf of Orr and Dr. Gerhart, thank you all for joining us today and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone.